I went to Nigeria for the first time in 1982 as a Rotary Fellow, and West African marketplaces always fascinated me. They're just a panoply of every kind of thing imaginable. And I think my first collecting was inspired by the wish to bring gifts back home to family members and to other priests and to priests whom I had met in the course of my studies in the United States. But as is typical of a good gift, I often wanted to keep it myself. So my first collecting related to cloth. I found West African hand-woven cloths really beautiful. But in the same markets where they sold antique and used clothing, I would often find African sculptures and African art, brass bracelets, wooden sculptures. And thereafter, I made friends with an art historian who specialized in Afro-Cuban religions and saw the few items that he had purchased, and I found them fascinating. Every population in the world uses objects to configure social relationships. And one of the contexts in which they do so, we might describe as religion. So in an effort to understand what made me distinctive as an African American among my fellow Americans, in a wish to understand why the conventional representation of our difference as merely deficiency of what African cultures have had to do with African diaspora cultures has been on religion. We focus on a range of religions in this exhibition. They include West African Yoruba religion, which is practiced in southwestern Nigeria and the Benin Republic, as well as Congo religion, which is practiced in the Democratic Republic of Congo and the Republic of Congo, neighboring countries with Bantu-speaking populations. The cultural history that unites Africa to the Americas was first rooted in the slave trade. It massively affected the United States and the colonies that would become the United States. It even more massively affected Cuba, a much smaller landmass that received more African captives than the United States and its antecedent colonies. So first it was a slave trade that brought many captives primarily to grow sugar, not cotton. And it so happened that in those countries where there was a higher ratio of African to European labor, and those countries that were Catholic rather than Protestant, African religions tended to bloom, to flourish, to develop the most vivid forms with the names of African gods most actively remembered, with African practices having a space to develop the most elaborate artistic forms. Ever since the beginning of the 19th century, that flux and reflux between African cultures and Latin American cultures has been shaped by both the slave trade and the movement of free people. Ever since the Enlightenment, Europeans and especially Protestants have been very conflicted about the meaning of things in our lives and not quite certain about what to do with the material wealth that the prosperity flowing from the slave trade and the Industrial Revolution produced. European philosophers, in trying to work out what was ethically desirable in European societies, how its political orders should be organized, and worried about the role of material objects in their lives, have chosen to displace that anxiety onto Africans and to point the finger at Africans and call them fetishists, saying that they overvalue goods in a way that they shouldn't, that they wrongly value goods, that they do things with objects that they shouldn't be doing. But of course, that was a projection of Europeans' own anxiety about what they were doing with objects and what objects they were overvaluing. I want visitors to this exhibition to see the beauty that was produced by people under duress. People who not only remembered African traditions, but thought carefully about the politics that affected Africa, that affected people in the African diaspora, that affected people of all colors in countries that have been colonized and have been subject to the power of larger northern countries. I want people to see the beauty of what they've created, even when they didn't have much money. I'd also like people to understand the meaning of material objects in our lives, how different cultures value different kinds of objects. And even within any given culture, people debate the worth of an object. Objects, furthermore, are often the focus of social relationships among us. Objects often inspire debates over what the object means, but those debates are often displacements of disagreements about how social relations should be conducted, who owes what to whom, and why.